Much, Romeo. So just let me get my slideshow rolling. Can everybody see that? Looks like it's pretty good. All right. So it's my pleasure to speak with you today about things like labor market. I am going to have to close all the chat windows because my computer screen isn't all that large. I hope you'll bear with me as I deliver. I think this may be only my second keynote. So I hope you enjoy. I'm going to start by saying I'm not an economist. You heard my bio. I'm not an economist, nor am I an epidemiologist, but I don't think we can really talk about careers and work without talking about the economy and talking about the immediate effect that COVID-19 is having on our work search. So today, we're going to take a look primarily at the economic perspective of what's happening so that you can start to make some career plans for yourself. So there we go. So what we're going to talk about is we're going to answer the question, what is the labor market anyway? We're going to get an economist's perspective on the economy and what's happening right now. We're going to talk about some strategies for developing a plan for yourself, and we're going to talk about the importance of keeping whole. So at the end of all this, you're still in one piece. It's very important. So what is the labor market anyway? Let's unpack a little bit this term that you've probably heard a lot, but you may not be all that familiar with what it means. So first, in any market, which means a real or intangible space where things are bought and sold, there are two basic concepts that you should understand: supply and demand. Of course, supply is what's available and demand is what's wanted. So for example, if there are lots of fish in the meat market and people want fish, the price remains steady. If there are lots of fish, but people want beef, the price of fish drops. If people choose to go on all fish diets, the price of fish skyrockets because so much fish is wanted. So in the labor market then, the supply is the number of people available to work. And this is usually counted as the number of people between the ages of 15 and 65 years old. Their time and skills are for sale. You could say, if there are any Marxists in the audience, we can have a debate about that later, okay? But their time and skills are arguably for sale as far as economists are concerned. And then demand is the number of open jobs, which employers would really like to fill with the time and skill of workers. So where there's lots of demand, lots of open jobs, the economy thrives, right? Prices rise. Where the economy is not, or where there are not as many open jobs, the economy doesn't do as well. Okay, prices drop. The reality is way more complicated than this. Okay, and again, any economics students in the audience can take me to task later on. Have a coffee with me when we're allowed to have coffee in person again. I just wanted to give sort of a general idea of what labor market is so that you can understand what news anchors are talking about on the TV every night. There are lots of factors that affect the labor market, okay? And we've got a few of them on the screen. When we talk about labor market, we should always be clear on our time frame. Time really matters. So how's the labor market today? Just today? Honestly, it's pretty ugly. I won't say it's not. But how has the labor market been for the last 2 years? Actually, really good, really, really good. And how is it likely to be in the next 2 years? I think there are reasons to be optimistic actually about how it might look at the end of 1 to 2 years. And we're going to talk about that. So time frame matters. We also have to talk about the geographic region that we're talking about when we talk about labor market. We almost never talk about the global labor market. That's a nebulous concept and it's really hard to visualize. So it makes more sense sometimes to talk about the Canadian labor market. Although that again is pretty big and different things will be happening in different parts of the country. So it makes more sense to talk about provincial labor markets in Canada most of the time because there are varying supplies of workers and varying industries, so varying demands for workers, okay? For example, Ontario has a lot of workers, so we have a good supply of workers, whereas Saskatchewan was actually recently recruiting people from Ontario to go to Saskatchewan because they didn't have enough workers. That's an interesting thing. And again, different industries, again, this is a demand thing. I'm sure you've heard representatives from Alberta and Newfoundland talking about the needs of the oil industries out there, for example. But Ontario doesn't have one, right? So we don't talk about that need here. And what we call institutions also affect the labor market as well. for example, licensing bodies. Maybe you've heard that internationally trained doctors who previously could not get a license to practice in Ontario, some of them are going to be allowed to apply for 30-day licenses under certain conditions so that they could work in hospitals here and care for people who caught COVID-19. That was very interesting for me, again, as someone who just finished a doctoral degree and dissertation on the experiences of immigrant professionals. So at this point, I'm going to need Romeo, maybe I'm going to pick on you, Romeo, to tell me if you cannot hear this video. All right, so let me know if you cannot hear it. I'm going to cross my fingers.
No, not yet, Jen.
Still can't hear it? Okay. Okay, I have a different idea. We are going to do this. So let me know, Romeo.
Oh, nothing yet.
Still no? Okay. Can you see it though?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay. We're gonna get this. Aha, I found it. All right, we should have it now. Can you hear?
Coming years. That would make fiscal restraint a likely drag on growth through the medium term. Now with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Brian.
Romeo, can you hear it?
Yep.
All right, here we go. Just in time for the part I want you to hear. I built in a few seconds of extra. All right, so this is about a 3-minute video. Please enjoy.
Prado, who will speak about the outlook for Canada's economy. Brian?
Thank you, Leslie. Like the other regions we've discussed, Canada is also experiencing the largest economic hit of the post-war period. A nearly 40% annualized contraction of GDP is expected this quarter, although, as Leslie noted, annualization isn't as useful in this scenario. Put differently, we expect the economy to be nearly 15% smaller this quarter than it was at the end of last year, and the unemployment rate to hit the 14% to 17% range. Even that will mask the scale of the impact. The March employment data, which came just as social distancing was starting, already revealed over 1 million lost jobs, with the slide highlighting some of the hardest hit sectors on the right. This was enough to erase more than 3 years of net gains, but even that figure masks the number of people who had 0 or near 0 hours. Adding that group back in brings the total to more than 2.5 million who effectively weren't working last month as a result of the pandemic. The impacts we've seen have already been dramatic across almost all sectors. Again, the right-hand side of the slide shows you just a few of the more obvious areas where social distancing is likely to have a significant impact. We've seen even more impacts than this with, to take just one example, all major auto assembly plants completely shuttered as we speak. Now, of course, there are some offsetting factors, including the amazing work that many manufacturers have been doing, stepping up to deliver PPE and other necessary supplies. But the key to this shock is social distancing. The bigger the shock to the economy, the better, from a health perspective, as that implies a more effective blockage of transmission vectors. What is challenging and fairly unique about the current situation is the focus on the service sector. As mentioned by Leslie, you can't stockpile haircuts or nights out to sell later. Just as in the US, that means a lot of the spending and economic activity that would have taken place simply won't. So as you can see on the left part of the slide, at this point, we don't necessarily expect the longer run pace of growth to be impacted, but about a quarter of the current shock does not get recovered. That's part of why we have that Nike swoosh sort of pattern to the GDP forecast. So I mentioned a roughly 40% drop annualized in the second quarter. How do we get to these sorts of large numbers? To give a sense, let's take a reasonable starting point. The arts, entertainment, recreation sector. We've already seen widespread cancellation of events, closures of theaters, and so on. And let's put a 90% shock there, so a virtual shutdown, again consistent with what we've seen, but let's make it a bit shorter. Let's make it only a month in length with a quick return to normal. Even despite the small share you see on the right-hand side there, less than 1% of GDP, that kind of shock would result in about a percentage point drop in annualized growth in the quarter. For the larger food services and accommodation sector, the same sort of exercise yields a 2.7 percentage point hit. So these are just a pair of examples, but hopefully they provide a sense of how quickly you can get to the kind of economic outcomes we're talking about and the magnitude of the impact of the social distancing and other measures. Of course, it's very important to remember that these shocks are not occurring in isolation, and there may be offsets. I can only imagine how many streaming service subscriptions have been sold in the past few weeks, and the halls outside of my condo tell me Amazon and online shopping more generally have ramped up considerably.
All right, so let me go back to our PowerPoint slide. Can you see the PowerPoint slide, Romeo? That should be the last time I have to trouble you.
Yep, no worries. We can see everything.
Yeah. All right. Let me go back to the Zoom view up there. All right. So, and I'd like to thank our sponsors, TD, for that webinar. They were very, very helpful in terms of helping us to get ready to have this conversation about economics. So let's unpack that a little bit, because those of you who don't study economics might have been like, there's a lot of jargon happening there. So here's a screenshot of that slide, okay? And in case you missed it, what they're basically saying is the economic setback caused by so many businesses closing during March and April, and they were forced to close, right? The government said you must close to create social and physical distancing, and especially industries on the table on the right, okay? Those business closures is causing setback in the economy, which also means setbacks in the labor market. And it's gonna take some time for those to recover, even once we start figuring out how to go back to work safely, okay? So the green line, which is original to the slide, you can see it's kind of a swoop. The green line shows gross domestic product, which is a measure of the economy. It therefore also approximately shows the demand side of the labor market. Remember we talked about supply and demand? So it sort of shows the demand side of the labor market. And it shows that there's been a hit to the demand side of the labor market. So that is the number of unfilled jobs. There are way fewer unfilled jobs. And as you can see, we're roughly at the bottom now. So if I click on annotate, that should let you see my mouse. Hopefully everybody can see my mouse up here. So, you know, if I look at the graph here, we're roughly at the bottom as far as the economists at TD are concerned. They're pretty sure we're at the bottom, which is some good news. As social distancing measures begin to ease in places like BC and Saskatchewan, which weren't hit as hard as Ontario was, we're going to start to see some slow recovery. So by the 2021 mark, you can see they're anticipating that there's going to be some improvement. I think they're also anticipating a vaccine for COVID-19 because the GDP and therefore the labor market really starts to pick up again around, like, let's say December, January 2021. Okay, so I've added a few more lines to help understand it. So this is the orange line here, okay, to help you understand this slide, is GDP, roughly my best guess at January 2020. Okay, so I think I'm pretty sure I managed to hit January 2020 with that orange line. Okay, and then I added sort of a January 2020, so you can sort of see that that's roughly where it was. It was on a bit of a dip, but it wasn't ridiculous. And then if you move along in time, you can see I've sort of put in where it looks like where GDP returns to what it was in January 2020, and that looks like a roughly January 2022. And I know we're talking about GDP, but again, we can use it as what's called a proxy for a labor market measure, okay? So it looks like by January 2022, the labor market should be looking pretty normal, okay? Hopefully I have shut off my mouse so that you don't have to watch it through the rest of the presentation. Okay, let's move along. So we have a rough timeline provided to us by economists for how long Canadians can expect this economic disruption to last. For Ontario, and especially Toronto, where we live closer together and it's harder to avoid breathing on people, it might take us a little longer to relax social distancing, which means, you know, maybe a little bit of a delay on the labor market recovery. But let's work with national numbers, okay, for developing a plan for ourselves. Let's talk about some timelines and choosing things to do for your personal timeline. And let's talk about the resources that are out there to sustain your body, mind, and spirit during this period. So in developing career plans, I often recommend to graduating students that you use LinkedIn to see what paths grads before you have walked. Those grads did not graduate into the kind of labor market disruption that we're seeing today. I'm still going to suggest that you use LinkedIn to look at other people's paths, but do it knowing that you will carve your own path through this period. There really aren't models that we can follow. They're calling it a depression. So the last depression that hit Canada was the 1930s. And the world today is a very different place than it was in the 1930s. So there really aren't paths that we can follow here. And because this territory is not well known, that means you might start moving in one direction. And at some point you may realize it's not a fit anymore. Maybe you develop a new goal, or your life priorities shift. Yesterday, Reggie talked about having his first child, and ooh, priority shift, right? And that's okay. My first and primary piece of advice for you is to change directions if you have a good reason to do so, and don't feel bad about it. The people close to you are probably going to say things like, but you had been going to do X, Y, and Z. And they're right. You were. Now you're going to do A, B, and C. Okay? You're probably hearing people talk about things going back to normal. My background is psychology. We're good at normal. I'm not sure that things are going to be the same when COVID-19 has been dealt with. So my second piece of advice is to be skeptical of the word normal, because it's just what society decides, okay? And maybe as people, as a society, we'll decide that some of the changes, like maybe more opportunities to work from home, were good. And maybe we want to keep those things. And then there's a new normal that's different from the normal we had 2 years ago, okay? So be skeptical of that word when people talk about it. So let's take a big, hairy guess at some timelines here. I am not an economist, as I already said. I am not an epidemiologist, as I already said. So we really don't know exactly what it's going to look like. We don't know what normal is going to look like either. And I should also share the full disclosure. I watch a lot of CBC News. So the expertise from economists and epidemiologists that I'm trying to distill here mostly comes from the experts that CBC brings on. I like their balance, okay? So what professionals in economics and epidemiology seem to be saying is that A, until we figure out how to protect each other from COVID-19 when we're together, and B, that we get the vaccine once it's completed, there will be labor market disruption, okay? Companies are uncertain too, and uncertainty causes big companies to retreat. That's just what they do. Startups get excited in disruption. So if you might be comfortable working for a startup, they might be, I'd be enjoying this a little bit, but big companies tend not to take risks in uncertain environments. So a recent survey of representatives of 50 fairly big companies, banks, industrial giants, and so on, found that about 1/3 of them plan to reduce their hiring for the fall, okay? And so that tells you a little bit about how they're retreating. And that number was from April 14th. Not sure how it's looking today, right? We've had 2 more weeks to see what's going on. So being together in the same place before we have a vaccine is a little bit scary for the vulnerable people that we're connected with. Think about your grandmother, your grandfather, your aunts and uncles, maybe even yourself, if you have an underlying health condition. So we can expect that it's still going to be a few months before people are being together in the same workspaces again. And then again, it probably won't be everyone all at once. A vaccine is about a year away, according to the experts on CBC. Of course, they're hoping it's faster, but realistically, for something safe, let's say we're really lucky and it's a Christmas present. Okay, so it's by Christmas, December, it seems to be safe and we're ready to start mass producing and distributing. Well, it's still going to take some time to mass produce it and distribute it. So let's say maybe we can really come back to life in spring 2021. Okay, everything back to normal, whatever normal is going to be in spring 2021. Maybe something like that. But whatever the timeline is, we're going to need to give public health experts and scientists time to figure out the plans for making this happen. It will not happen this summer. Of that, we can be pretty sure. So what we can do is look at the period between now and vaccine arrival. And then we can look at the period from vaccine arrival to everyone getting it, okay? So we're looking at total return to workplaces. If we want to go back to normal, whatever that was, we could probably do it by January 2022, which is why I showed you that graph, right? January 2022. You have some options for how to spend your time. You could do anything, and we'll talk about that. You could do something, and we'll talk about some somethings, okay? I'm also going to make the case that with some of this time, especially the immediate time, you could do nothing. And I'm going to unpack what I mean by nothing. So I'm an optimist, and I sincerely hope that we will not see economic disruption like this again in your lifetime. And if my wish comes true, at no time in your future life will you have the opportunity to just take a few months to do nothing and still have some income. We are very fortunate that the federal government has launched the CERB and hopefully soon the CESB, those financial benefits, and I would like to strongly encourage you to use them. Note that they are counted as income and you will have to pay income tax on them later, just like a paycheck, okay? To go back to this, you've been in school and or working and or having part-time jobs and or volunteering for 18 years, almost straight through without a break. Your job, when you get one, your first full-time job, will probably give you 2 weeks of vacation. That's it, 2 weeks of vacation every year, meaning you will work 50 weeks a year for the next 40 years, 40, which is double what you have accomplished so far. So arguably, what you have in front of you is at least a few months in which you can choose to feel much less pressure than usual to get out there and get a job, because there just aren't as many to be had right now at this very moment. So let me clarify what I mean by doing nothing, okay? I do not mean spending 24 hours a day on TikTok and Instagram. When I say there can be value in doing nothing, what I mean is do nothing that counts economically as nothing. The economy doesn't keep track of your sleep habits or your eating habits, but those are really important. This would be a great time to work on your sleeping habits and learning to cook. The labor market doesn't keep track of your emotional connection with family and friends. So you could take this time to really reconnect with the people you love. It will have to be virtual like we're doing this week, but this is a good time to do it. The labor market also doesn't track your creativity. So this is a great time to do some creative writing or art, or just read a book for fun. Remember reading for fun, you know, before university? Those were good times. You could give yourself the gift of a few weeks to read great ebooks. I've heard that Audible has made their children and youth books available for free. So if you enjoy teen lit, that's a great opportunity. And the Toronto Public Library has a great collection of ebooks. I'm sure other libraries do too. Look into it. Finally, I would like to encourage you to spend some of this time doing what you may never have the time to do so fully and so thoughtfully ever again, and that is to reflect. Your awareness of yourself and your motivations is very important to pursuing a satisfying life, because you have the opportunity to make wiser, better informed choices for yourself if you really know what you're all about. I have just a few concepts covered on the slide. Reflect on your goals, for example. What do you want to accomplish in the next 40 years? Reflect on your values and what's actually important to you in your life. And also reflect on what's important to you in your future jobs. Note that they may be different. They may not be the same. Also take the time to figure out what you're good at, where your strengths are, as Dr. Rashid was trying to talk about yesterday. Hopefully you'll take some time and do some reflecting on your strengths. You'll find your future employment so much easier if you're operating from your strong points. There are resources in the Career and Co-Curricular Network that you may find useful as well for the process of self-assessment and self-reflection in the context particularly of your career. And here's where to find some of them. So under the menu item, resources, you will find Career Cruising, which is a database of Canadian career information. It has a fun tool called the Career Matchmaker, which has 116 questions for assessing your career interests. It'll match you to careers based on your interests and based on the real interests of satisfied workers. So kind of, again, matchmaking. It's pretty neat. U of T also has a strong collection of ebooks, which you can access through the library before you graduate. And we have a lib guide or library guide to help you navigate the collection that's circled on the slide. So do check that out. So let's talk about, instead of nothing, doing something. And one of the somethings that you could do would be to add some skills. No education is ever complete. Even those of you who are graduating, congratulations. I wish I could tell you you're done, but not yet. There's always something to learn. And now that you're thinking more about the world of work, you might have noticed there are skills identified in job ads that you might want to learn. For example, Excel shows up a lot. And unless you studied business, you might not have gotten a lot of Excel skills in your courses. And at no time in your future life, probably, are you likely to be paid. Remember, we have access now to CERB and CESB. At no time in your future life are you likely to be paid to just learn. So what could you learn? Now, my colleague Byung did a wonderful webinar yesterday on this topic, so I'll just very briefly go over this. But you can learn for free. And what could you learn? Well, I would suggest that you follow your aspirations. So are you planning to be a manager as soon as possible? Well, maybe you could add some skills in management or leadership or coaching. Do you love data? Again, learn new Excel tricks or new pieces of software. Do you love ideas? Well, there are wonderful and informative YouTube channels like TED and Crash Course and Khan Academy. Take advantage of those. You can also use job ads in industries or your fields of work that are of interest to you to identify what kinds of skills you may want to add to yourself. And again, I do encourage LinkedIn research, even though you may not be able to follow a path directly anymore. Do look up the profiles of recent graduates from your programs and see what skills they have identified and take the opportunity to learn them now for free. And you can learn them for free, as my colleague Byung said yesterday, on platforms like Coursera and Udemy. Most significantly, I want to make sure that you know that you don't have to pay for it. Over the last few years, those of you who are graduating, you've become accustomed to paying for learning opportunities, but you don't have to when there are specific skills that you want to learn. LinkedIn Learning or lynda.com is available through most libraries, the U of T Library and Toronto Public Library for sure. So please, please don't pay for it. And the cool thing about lynda.com or LinkedIn Learning is that you can add a badge or like a sticker on your LinkedIn profile when you've completed it. And those of you who might have been, scouts or brownies or competitive athletes know how much fun it can be to collect ribbons and badges. Now, the difference between, university and these platforms is they often don't have instructors who you can follow up with individually a lot of the time. But maybe you have a friend or a classmate who might be interested in learning the same things, and maybe you can teach each other, just like university, right? How often do we spend time outside of school figuring things out for ourselves? So I encourage you to invite friends, invite classmates, invite family members who might be interested in learning some skills and figure it out together. In all honesty, in the world of work, every Excel trick that I know, someone taught me. So co-teaching, whatever you want to call it, self-teaching, learning groups, that's really the way that you will operate once you get out into the world of work. So you could think of this as a preview of what you're going to be doing as you move forward in your life. And don't forget to put it on your resume, right? You may want to rename your education section the education and training section, okay? These are things that employers will probably be interested in seeing. So we talked about the value of doing nothing, the value of doing something, and now let's talk about the value of anything. So some of you, for a variety of financial reasons, will want to take any job that pays more than the CERB or CESB. And I want to say, that's okay too. That is completely understandable that your family has financial needs that just aren't being accommodated by the relief that's available from the government right now. And you may want to take any job that would allow you to make more than those benefits. And that's fair. The one thing I'll ask you to do is to keep the health status of the people you live with and the people that they may see in person as well during this period of physical distancing in your mind as you make decisions about your possible exposure to COVID-19. It's weird to think about our grandparents or a beloved aunt with a health condition as part of our job search right now. But during these times, I will suggest that you make that part of your equation. It's a little weird. So folks ask me, well, who's still hiring? I'm going to admit right up front that I have no special insight into the world of work. We don't get heads ups from companies or previews of when jobs are going to be released. We see them at the same time you do. So my first suggestion to you is to watch the news for trends in business and the economy. When the economic shutdown began because of the need for physical and social distancing, orders of goods and food through online retailers like Amazon and Walmart went through the roof. And in the USA, I'm told, I didn't look it up, but I am told that Amazon even advertised with slogans like, "Have you been laid off? We want to meet you." Pretty direct. So both organizations hired extensively in Canada. And by both organizations, I mean, for example, Walmart and Amazon. And they may in fact still be hiring. True story, I ordered groceries through Instacart for the first time, and they actually arrived this morning. And in less than 24 hours after I placed the order, I got an email trying to recruit me into being an Instacart shopper, to being an employee. So that was really interesting. So the trend seems to be continuing in online retail. In addition, in the technology sector, I see stories about well-established companies moving their operations to their workers' homes. And I also see stories about startups that are creatively leveraging their technology for remote work. So the tech sector seems to be fairly okay as well. And even if you choose to take the federal government benefits, the CERB or CESB, I believe you're still allowed to earn a little bit of extra money on top of it. And you could do that by doing one of those jobs or maybe by freelancing. There are platforms that connect freelancers. What's a freelancer? People like you who have a particular skill to offer, maybe graphic design or computer programming, data analysis, whatever it might be. You can offer your services to people and companies who need to borrow your skills for a project. And some of those platforms include Fiverr, Guru, and Elance. What they do is they formalize agreements so that you get paid what you agreed you would get paid, okay? So can you design graphics, crunch data, write blogs? There might be short-term opportunities for you. Something to think about. There are resources, again, in the current co-curricular learning network for you. There is a job board and there are still jobs on it. So please do take a look at the off-campus jobs board. There's also a tool called Big Interview, which is an interview practice tool. When you're job searching, you want to keep your interview skills sharp and ready because you might get an invitation today for an interview tomorrow. So if you stay sharp and ready, that won't be a big deal. But if you haven't practiced interviewing in weeks or months up to that point, it could be painful. So my advice is stay sharp. If you think you might be interested in trying your luck in other labor markets and searching for work outside of Canada, we have two resources for you, one called Going Global and the other called My World Abroad. Check them out. They're databases of economic and industry information that you can use for your job search elsewhere in the world. Going Global particularly says that the countries they profile are safe for Canadians. I would say always check with Travel Canada before making plans to go work somewhere. But that promise is there, that those are safe countries to go to. I've already mentioned the CERB and the CESB. At the time I developed this talk, the CESB was not yet available because it hadn't been passed in Parliament, but the government is working on it. So I expect you'll be able to get it very, very soon. Also, watch the news. Like I said, remember that our government is kind of making things up very thoughtfully, but they're kind of making things up as they go. This kind of economic disruption, again, hasn't happened in 100 years, and the world was very different then. So they are also charting their own path through this. There are no models for them to follow. So watch the news. Who knows what other interesting things are going to be coming up. I've been pretty interested so far. I'm pretty excited about it. So there are also personal resources that I would like to make sure you're aware of. It's normal to feel remember normal, whatever normal is, normal changes. But right now, it's normal to feel all kinds of weird things right now. You might feel lethargic, or you might feel full of energy. You might be really enjoying the solitude. Sometimes you might even be really angry with the solitude. You may actually feel grief over plans that are now not going to happen. You may be excited about new possibilities that you're starting to see now, though. So as we kind of go up and down on this emotional roller coaster, please reach out to family and friends as appropriate when you want support. They're there, they love you, they want to help take care of you. There are also community resources out there. So there's mental health resources, medical resources, housing resources, even safety resources if you're not feeling safe. And the Health and Wellness Center at UTSC has actually put a great list together. So I would like to encourage you to check out their list of resources. Last, at the end of all this, let's strive to keep ourselves whole so that when it's past, we can move forward into the future that we will create for ourselves in whatever our new normal looks like. Remember, society decides. So what does that mean to try to keep yourself whole? Well, that means managing your expectations for yourself and others. We're all being limited in a lot of really strange ways right now, from social and physical distancing from our family and friends and coworkers, to simply being prevented from seeking work entirely because our preferred industry is on total hiatus. Your well-being, on as many dimensions as you would like to count, including mental, physical, and spiritual, is integral to who you are. So take care of those dimensions so that you are still integrated on the other side of all this disruption. Hopefully many of you attended Dr. Rashid's talk yesterday on coping strategies. And one strategy he wanted to share, and he is sharing in his slides, I believe, is the strategy of finding ways to have gratitude. It's easy to get caught up in a downward mental or verbal spiral of complaints and frustrations. Those complaints and frustrations are real. I'm not pretending they aren't. But human brains are suggestible, and we can affect how we feel about what's going on by what we expose our brains to. So we should acknowledge the fears and worries and frustrations, yes, and then focus on the things that we can still be grateful for. Maybe my internet crapped out on me yesterday, well, as Dr. Rashid's did, right? But I have internet access today. Myself and the people at U of T, we care about you. So you can say that, people care about me. You could say, today I have a place to stay and I have something to eat. And there are community resources I can access when I need them. Canada's very lucky that way. Many of our neighbors just south in the United States don't have that. So there are lots of things we can choose to feel gratitude for. And there's lots of research that shows it actually shifts how you feel about the situation. And that shift is long-term if you make a point of paying attention to gratitude. So one idea you may have heard before, maybe it's new to you, and research shows that it really works, is at the end of every day, make a point of identifying 3 things that you can be grateful for. They might be the same 3 things every day. I have a place to stay, I had something to eat today, and there's someone who loves me. And that's okay. Those things will slowly begin to change how you're feeling about the situation. It doesn't change the situation. I acknowledge that. But it can certainly begin to shift how you feel about it. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. I would like to take the opportunity to thank our sponsors, MBNA and TD Insurance. They are very kind helpers on this journey. And at this point, I can take some questions. Let me just go back to my first slide. And turn on the Q&A box. So by the way, I can't remember, did we designate any helpers for me on the webinar today? We might not have.
You're muted, Debbie.
Hi, Jen, it's me.
There you go.
Oh, perfect, Debbie. All right. So what kind of questions are
We
there?
have a couple questions. So this was a great question. Just out of curiosity, could you compare and contrast the labor economy market from the 1930s, 9/11, 2009, 2008, 2009 economic crisis, and today with COVID-19?
Oh, wow. Okay. As I said,
Yeah.
I am not an economist. Well, let's start with the 1930s. Oh, in the 1930s, Canada was primarily an agricultural country, right? Most, the percentage of farmers, I can't remember off the top of my head, but the percentage of farmers of the population was something like 25%. 25% of the population, or 30%, some astronomically huge number, were farmers. Today, I believe the number is less than 2%. So just in terms of your economic base, entirely different today. And that's why we can't really follow the paths that government followed in the 1930s. Also, those measures didn't work very well. So that's another reason not to follow them. So different economy today. We have much more industry, we have technology. We now exist in an information age, right? And so information has value in a way, data has value in a way that nobody could even have conceptualized in the 1930s. Shouldn't say that. There's some science fiction writers who conceptualized it, but not so much politicians. In terms of 2008, 2009. So in 2008, 2009, economists were only using the word recession. Okay, so recession, in terms of that dip that you saw on the graph, here I can go to the graph. In terms of the dip that you saw on that graph, a recession is shorter. I'm not sure why it's shorter, but a recession tends to be expected to be shorter. It may not be as deep, I think, usually as well. But in this case, economists are actually using the word depression. So it's a deeper impact on the economy. That crunch down is much more significant than it was in 2008, 2009. And we know that the disruption is going to last longer. So that's why they're using the word depression.
And we have one more. Someone wants to know, what about research positions? Do you think it's a good decision to send emails through labs who might not be available or may not have available positions for the near future?
I mean, I would say it certainly doesn't hurt, but be open to the fact that a lot of labs, well, any lab in a hospital, they were told to all go home. It's not safe for you to be here. We could have hordes of people with COVID-19 coming through here. You're going to catch it and take it home to your family and friends who are vulnerable. Any lab, honestly, that isn't necessary for the immediate crisis was very likely shut down. So labs and hospitals shut down. Other kinds of research labs, you could try. Absolutely, give it a try. But until we figure out how we can be in the same place, how to be in a hospital and not worry about catching COVID-19, and again, bringing it home to vulnerable people, I'm not sure.
Okay. One more question. Can people with humanities skills realistically qualify for a significant number of positions in industries that are currently doing well, technology and business and marketing?
Absolutely. The career team and I were laughing that we use the phrase, it depends, a lot. So we use it in the context of grad school. We also use it in the context of job search. because I'm hoping that those of you who studied humanities and social sciences, which is actually how I did my psychology degree, I avoided all the rats and brains, didn't want them, wasn't interested. So my degree is actually a BA in psychology. So those of you who studied humanities and social sciences, I hope you had part-time jobs. I hope you had summer jobs. I hope you were involved in clubs, because those are wonderful places to build skills. Those are wonderful places to expand your competencies in a way that tech sector, business, that they would all be interested in. So for example, maybe you were in charge of program planning for a club, right? So you were in charge of working with the other executives and sort of laying out the plan for the year. Well, those are organizational skills. And then maybe you decided there were 2 events, one fall, one winter. Well, an event, maybe it was a networking night, or maybe it was a fashion show, whatever it was, that's a project, okay? So I would encourage you to learn the language of project management. What are the steps of project management, and what's the language that business and technology use to talk about it? There's a lot of administration as well involved in running an event, as an example. So there's all the record keeping, there's registration processes, there's follow-up, there's beautiful PowerPoints that are necessary sometimes. There's communication. Communication is a huge piece of it. Negotiation, all those things fit into administrative, business skills, project management. So I'd like to encourage you to, again, learn the language of the world that you're thinking about getting into. LinkedIn, again, LinkedIn profiles are wonderful places to kind of go investigating what grads from programs like yours have done in the past, and borrow ideas from them. And again, look at job ads in industries and roles that you might be interested in pursuing, and really analyze, could I really maybe have done that? There's a very good chance that you did. And then use their lingo against them in your resume.
Can I ask a question? Jen, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. I don't know if I pay enough attention. Maybe you addressed that earlier when you say there's long-term part of the labor market. I think in this presentation, we got a lot of insights from you about the short term. For long term, if I want to know more about the trend, if I'm choosing major now, I want to know in 5 years, what kind of jobs are out there good to go. What kind of tools can I use to do the long-term labor market research?
Gosh, I'm going to encourage you to watch the news or study economics as one of your programs. It really, this is a really interesting time in history. You'll tell your grandkids about it. And I really don't mean that facetiously, because this hasn't happened since the 1930s. We haven't seen this kind of disruption is really the only word to use. We haven't seen this level of disruption before and since the 1930s, and not in our technologically enabled world. So I encourage you to watch the news, read articles from people who are respected as futurists. So you could Google, futurists, and definitely, sort of read, is this person truly reputable, or is this person kind of out there? But read the work of people who call themselves futurists and are trying to guess at what things are going to be. I did give you one hint, which was that a lot of people are actually enjoying the work from home thing. People who are parents would probably find it a lot easier if they also didn't have to manage their children at the same time. But the not commuting, right? Especially around Toronto, because commutes can just be brutal in Toronto. The not commuting thing is good for a lot of people. And so that's, for example, in 5 years, one thing that I would assume is going to happen. And that's going to rely on technology, right? It's very difficult to work from home without good telecom, without good internet. So those are certainly fields that are going to be useful. But also people skills, right? If more people are working from home, then people skills become very important. So I would actually foresee business in coaching people how to work well in an online environment because that's not easy. I would also predict as a relation to that as well. And I'm not a futurist, by the way. Okay. I'm just, just thinking logically through what's happening here. I would also suspect that we're going to continue to see lots of work in logistics and operations as people choose to continue to have things delivered, right? Because if I don't have to drive to work, if I'm working from home, well, then it's inconvenient to go to the grocery store. So we've all now been trained to just order stuff to be delivered to us. So I think that trend will continue as well. So things in logistics, operations. Amazon has been trying drone delivery. Now, Ontario regulations don't currently allow drone delivery, but there are some places in the United States, I believe, that have been allowed to try it with Amazon. So drone operator may be a job that you could pursue in the future. So who knows? Watch the news, read from people who are legitimate futurists, and it's going to be interesting to see what happens.
Thank you. It's more, that remind me beyond what Beyond said yesterday. Maybe we want to focus more about the skills needed rather than specific job titles. We won't know.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
The skills. Thank you.
And I have a couple more in the chat box, Jen, or in the Q&A. Usually getting an internship is a long process where people network for months to get the right job, 8 to 9 months down the line. What will be the right way to get the same quality of internship by the summer of next year?
Oh, start now. Absolutely. Start now, because by summer next year, again, I'm going from my CBC economists and epidemiologists. By summer next year, we should be seeing, fingers crossed, the rollout of a vaccine. So businesses will be expecting to be hiring interns, co-ops, and the like by 8 to 9 months next summer from now. So I would encourage you to begin that networking now. And Byung did a fabulous workshop yesterday on how to use LinkedIn to connect with people. And I believe a few of us have also recommended the platform 10,000 Coffees, where you can meet U of T alumni online. Networking still happens, even though we're having to communicate virtually right now. So begin now, absolutely.
Okay, I have one more. How do you think graduate schools and professional schools would be impacted in the near future and the job opportunities after? Example, would they be more lenient in their acceptance?
That's a good question. I think, and I'll ask Adrian actually. Adrian has been very quietly working in the background here. You haven't seen him yet, but if he has any thoughts to answer, to add after I've added my thoughts. He worked in graduate school admissions for a long time, so I would value his input here. But I would suspect that, and we've actually already seen it, all graduate and professional programs are adjusting policies. Unfortunately, means adjusting them to being more vague rather than being more specific. And lots of students already complain to us that graduate and professional school admission policies sometimes seem vague. They're getting vaguer, okay? But by making them vaguer, more vague, we're getting the advantage that they are going to be able to mush their admission criteria a little bit more to accommodate, for example, for more credit, no credit, right? We saw a lot of students choosing pass, fail, or credit, no credit on a lot of their courses in the winter semester because there was that weird slice in the middle where it was like, okay, classes are now going to be all online. Your profs have a week to figure out how to do that. Go. And that was really difficult, not just for the students, but also for the faculty members. Totally understandable that a lot of folks chose to credit, no credit things because the learning was weird and the assignments changed and now I don't have an exam, I have 3 papers. Oh my gosh, that was a lot. That was a lot to manage. And so we have seen a lot of graduate and professional schools, again, make their admissions criteria more vague, where students usually ask us, wish that they were more specific. And we're seeing them make them more vague so that they can accommodate. And I mean, it's not like anyone's ever going to forget 2020 when COVID-19 shut down the world. At least they're not going to remember it during the time period that you're going to be applying to grad school. Even if you're in first year right now, you're applying to grad school, 4, 5, 6 years from now, people are still going to remember COVID-19. We're probably still going to be dealing with the fallout because it's not like it's just going to go away. It's still, viruses always just circulate, right? They never truly go away unless we can vaccinate every single person, right? There are very few diseases that we've been able to totally eliminate. So no one's going to forget about this time. And so the short answer to your question is yes, they're going to accommodate. How depends on the program. Adrian, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, so I think your answer is right on, Jen. I think that from my experience working in a couple of different admission offices for grad school, that they definitely will continue to try and accommodate. And given the uncertainty and all the different academic, credit, no credits and different questions coming in, I think that they will definitely be open to looking at all the different situations and taking that into account. So I wouldn't worry as much about, different things that you might have done differently in your final year, and is that going to impact me negatively? I think they look at it and take it all into account, but you won't find that kind of information probably on their website. So best thing to, like Jen mentioned, is to contact grad schools or professional programs directly and ask them how they might consider these different circumstances. But yeah, I think they'll be very flexible given the upheaval that we've all gone through. I don't know that they would be, I think the question also asked if they'd be more lenient in admissions. I'm not sure if that was the question. I don't think they'll be more lenient in the sense that with the labor market being a tough labor market, there's probably going to be, my guess is just a personal thought, that there will be maybe a few more students looking at going to do post-grad programs and diplomas and degrees. So I'm not sure, but if I had to guess, I guess there may be a few more people applying for those programs in the future. So I think, standards will still be the same to get in, maybe even more people applying, but they'd be understanding if your academic background is not exactly what you thought it would be.
Thanks so much, Adrian. Romeo, I'm going to have to lean on you on this one because I can't remember what we heard at the Academic Affairs Committee. When, we don't know if studies are going to be online this fall, but we heard when a decision will be made. When? What was the time frame we were given for that decision?
I don't recall. The only thing I guess that maybe I can add is just the idea that online course offerings there'll be more of them this summer, certainly. And certainly some uncertainty with regards to the fall, but my understanding is that there's going to be plenty more online course offerings, but the specifics of the details are I'm a bit uncertain of at this point.
They are. If I do not quote my memory, please, I believe what was discussed was the university will make a decision no later than the end of May. So it does mean a few more weeks of not knowing.
Right, yes.
And Health Canada and, our chief doctor, Dr. Tam, what's going on in Ontario, what's safe. So it's tough.
There's one question from the chat box.
Mm-hmm.
I am a recent graduate, but do not really know what to do with my degree. I have been thinking if I do another completely different undergraduate. However, yesterday we said that experience are more important. Would you say it's better to acquire experience in different field or better than going back to school?
Well, I would like to strongly encourage you to have a conversation with a career advisor. So of course, UTSC students are totally welcome to connect with us. All the career centers at U of T are open. Actually, I'm pretty sure every career center across Ontario at every institution is open. So if you're a U of T student, please connect with your career center. In general, I don't know, I'm personally biased against doing an entire undergraduate again for a couple of reasons. And there's a personal bias, but the reasons I have that bias against doing an entire undergrad again are that there's no, I've never seen any data, and I do read StatsCan data that looks at the salary outcomes of grads, and there's no evidence that doing another bachelor degree, unless it's in something like nursing or engineering, it makes a net benefit. So you spend at least 2 more years, sometimes 2.5 or 3 years doing that second bachelor, and it doesn't improve your salary. And you've lost 2 years of either doing master's study or a postgrad college program, which often increases your salary opportunities, according to again StatsCan data. Or you could have been working. So that's 2.5 years of income that you could have been having. Instead, you were giving another university more money. Now, sometimes though, you just have to do a second bachelor degree if you realize, oh my gosh, I wanted to be a nurse. I'm so inspired by all the healthcare providers, you know, that are braving COVID-19 in the hospitals and long-term care facilities right now. I want to do that. Okay, then you actually do have to go and do a 2.5 more years of Bachelor of Science in Nursing. There's just no way around that because it's a licensed field and that's how you qualify for the license. But if you are an art student and you're thinking, oh, I really want a Bachelor of Science now, have a chat with one of the career advisors. I'm sure we can help you figure out either some college postgrad training or master's kind of training that might get you to a very similar place and actually have a more probable chance of increasing your income rather than just leaving it the same.
Thank you. No question, but there's one sharing from the chat box. Someone shared the job bank from government, that website, for job trends or some like long-term labor market analysis. What are your comments on that?
I don't love national labor market data, so I haven't been on that website lately. But if it can fine-tune it down to at least provincial data is a little more useful. Even better is regional data, because what happens, for example, what happens in the Golden Horseshoe or the Greater Toronto area even is different from what happens in Northern Ontario. I'm from Northern Ontario. So what happens economically up there is completely different to what happens down here. So someone asked about compare 2008, 2009 to now. It also depends on where you are. So Toronto experienced a really economic low. When the world experiences economic lows, the price of gold shoots through the roof, okay? What does that have to do with Northern Ontario? Mining. There are no mines in Toronto. There are tons of mines in Northern Ontario. So when Toronto was experiencing in 2008, 2009, the economy of my hometown in Northern Ontario boomed. So when you're talking about labor market, you know the finer tuned you can try to make it, the better, because it has huge regional differences. I don't know if that really answers the question about how I feel about that website, but yeah, the finer toothed comb you can access to get good labor market information, the better.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think I just checked their current stats is from, they're predicting from 2019 to 2021. I wonder when did they make the prediction?
Those predictions were made in 2018. They have no relevance to 2019. So, yeah. The government's too busy to update that. I would disregard it for now.
Agreed.
Okay.
If there are any more questions, I'll take them. Otherwise, oh, we have like 30 seconds for one more question. That would be it. Going once, twice. All right, thanks so much, folks. So just let me put on our other slideshow.